right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Paul Van Meter. I'm one of the founders of Proshop ERP, and I'm pleased today to be joined by Brian Anderson from our team and Jim Carr from Carr Machine and Tool in Chicagoland, right? Is that what you call it, Jim?
Yeah, we call it Chicagoland. Yes, right by 5 minutes west of O'Hare Airport.
Awesome. Well, we have, we think, an informative and exciting webinar today. Thank you very much for joining us. So Brian is going to, for some reason, we're having a little technical difficulty. He's not going to be able to share his camera today, but he's going to ride sort of shotgun here, he's going to go over some of our housekeeping stuff and chime in certainly as he does over the webinar. And let's dig into stuff. So Brian, why don't you just kind of do some of the housekeeping for us?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So in the Zoom webinar, we'll have a few different features that you guys can utilize. First of all, there's the chat. So if you just want to say, hey, tell us where you're from, that'd be awesome. Occasionally, if we have any links or anything to share, we'll often share them in the chat, and you can obviously copy out of the links or even save the chat before the end of the webinar if you want to do something. If you've got a specific question, we actually ask that you use the Q&A or the question and answer section. That way we can kind of go through them and itemize them, decide if we're going to answer them right then and there, or maybe save them up until the end and get into questions as we move along. So if you can just kind of do that, that'd be great. We'll also be sharing this webinar later. It'll be recorded, and so if you miss any parts or want to go back to anything, we'll be able to do that and send that out via social media and email, etc.
Awesome. And yes, as Brian said, if you want to just put in the chat where you're joining us from, we'd love to see where everyone is from. I know we always have a wide variety of people joining from all sorts of places. All right, Ben from Bloomington, Indiana, Rockford, Illinois.
Wow.
Not far from you. Mike from Colorado.
Brian, I got you. Sarah told me what to do, and right. I just clicked it through. So you are live, my friend.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The UK, Faribault, Minnesota, British Columbia, Spokane, Michigan. All right.
What time is it in the UK now?
It's late.
Yeah.
It is late.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining us.
For them. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's maybe after hours. I'm not sure.
Yeah, about 5 p.m. Yeah.
Let's see.
Kentucky, Columbus, is that Nebraska, Tennessee, Salt Lake City? Awesome. Woodinville.
And everyone is seeing my screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Awesome. Very good. Well, let's dig into it and let's jump in. So we're going to talk a little bit about the objectives of what we're trying to do with estimating. And then we'll talk about the history of Proshop, why we think we have something to say about this. And then we'll learn a little bit about Carr Machine and Jim, and then really just dig into the process itself, some of the important points and details that we want to share. And then we'll get into some Q&A at the end and go from there. So what is our objective with estimating? I believe our objective is to basically, in a nutshell, win good, profitable work. But there's some elements to that, right? You want the right fit work for your shop. I know Jim has some stories about that he's going to share later. We want to win it at the right price, right? We want it to be the market price that your customer is willing to pay, and have it be as ideally as profitable as possible. And we want that work from the right customers, right? You want customers that are well aligned with your company, with your values, quite honestly, that treat you well and treat you as a partner. And ideally, we want to balance our whole workforce. If you have different kinds of people out in the shop doing different things and work centers, we want to keep a nice even balance of all your machines being nice and full of work. We don't want certain machines being completely overloaded and other machines having no work at all, right? So we want to have everyone kind of rowing in the same direction towards profitability. I'm just going to share a few things about the history of Proshop. And our story actually started back when we started a machine shop ourselves. So my partners and I, yeah, you like that picture, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, how many square feet is that?
That's 2,000 square feet.
I was going to say about 2,500 square feet.
Yeah. So yeah, we rented that little space near Seattle, Washington, bought one Haas VF4 that we bought with a second mortgage that my partner took out on his house, and that was enough money to buy the machine, an old used manual mill and lathe, and pay for the first several months of this rent of this space. And we started knocking on doors looking for business. When we started, we were estimating and quoting and sort of tracking the whole company in Excel, right? We had some pretty fancy worksheets and workbooks that did all sorts of cool things, but it was still Excel and it was limited in what it could do. So within about 3 years, we had about a dozen people, and we were just outgrowing that system. It just wasn't going to scale with us anymore. So we started, we pulled down the Thomas Register off the big shelf, the big green books, and started doing research on ERP software. We didn't even really know what ERP software was because all of us never worked anywhere besides, you know, maybe delivering pizza during college. But we just started asking, all right, people, come in and show us what you got, show us how it's going to help our shop grow. And we showed them our spreadsheets and said, you know, we have all these cool tools to track, you know, cutting tools and work instructions and our inspection reports and everything like that. Show us how your software does that too. And none of them would do those kind of things, which we were really disappointed by, kind of dumbfounded, to be honest. And we decided to, instead of buying one of those and still having lots of spreadsheets, that we would start developing something for ourselves. So my partners knew this developer guy named Matt, and we asked him to join our team, and we started just building this system that we eventually called Proshop, just for ourselves. No intentions of selling it to anyone else, quite honestly. We grew over the next many years, sometimes almost doubling each year, and just kind of plugging away, building new features. And Proshop really was sort of the backbone of our growth at that time. You know, it just allowed us to keep everything scalable and manageable, and we just kept plugging away. It wasn't until 2008 that our biggest machine shop customer approached us and asked us if we would sell Proshop to them. Their production manager came and worked for us on the weekends for a while to earn some extra money. And he saw this, he saw Proshop, he said, "Where did you guys buy this?" We said, "No, we built it." And so he went back to the owners of the company, and they approached us and asked if we'd sell it to them. We said no at first, it wasn't for sale, but after some time we considered it, and it went so well that they started referring us to some other shops they worked with. So we did it a couple more times, and ultimately we made the decision to sell the shop and go full-time into the software business. So we sold Pro CNC in 2014, and in 2016 we opened our doors as Proshop. So I'd love to now introduce Jim. And so Jim is, I definitely can call you a friend and now a customer as well. You know, met Jim several years ago, and Jim owns, like I said before, owns Car Machine and Tool. Tell us a little bit more about Car Machine, Jim.
Sure, happy to, and thanks for having me on, Paul. Always a pleasure getting to chat with you and talking about all the good things about Proshop. Yeah, you know, Car Machine and Tool, my dad founded this company in 1973. I went to work for him at a very young age as an apprentice machinist, working on manual mills and lathes. In the late 80s, we kind of segued into CNC machine tools, and I was tasked with that responsibility of implementing all that CNC technology on the shop floor. I was successful and moved forward into management and beyond. 2004, I took full ownership of the company. And as you probably know, if you guys listen to me on the podcast, Making Chips, you know that my son Ryan is with me here in the company now. He's been with the company now for 5 years full time, and it's been quite successful, quite frankly. We're heading in a great direction. And I just was talking to Paul yesterday a little bit about today, and I said part of the legs of our recent success in years has been the implementation of Proshop into our shop, just because we were using Job Boss before. It was working, but it wasn't working really well. And when we sat down and talked about an ERP system, we really wanted something really holistic, something that was relatable to what the shop floor language was all about. And we really felt like Proshop was the ERP system to take us to the next level. So we're going, that picture that you're looking at there is a rendering of our new building that we're going to be in about, hopefully in about 3 months. It's 3 times the size of what we're in right now. And
Congrats, that's cool.
thanks. It's super sexy, industrial modern. It's an existing building here about 2 blocks away, but we're completely redoing the whole thing. So from inside to outside. So
and
that's a little. And I'm the co-host of Making Ships manufacturing podcast. I've been doing that with Jason now since 2015, I think. Again, we've had great success. We've been ranked by multiple platforms as the #1 manufacturing podcast out there. Humbling to hear those kind of words. Never in my life, I thought at this age, I'd be hosting the #1 manufacturing podcast. That there's people that are actually interested in listening to my story in this industry, and it's really humbling. It's very humbling. It's humbling.
Well, you make it fun. We're all just here to enjoy ourselves, and so that's awesome. And we just recently helped you, Michael Collins, one of our QMS specialists, recently helped you achieve your AS9100, right?
That is correct. Absolutely.
And
that was a big deal. That was a big deal. I thought it was going to be easier than it was, and it takes a team. We had an internal team of people, working, and of course Michael was a great help.
And you recently got ITAR registered as well, so you're really kind of moving into some new spaces, yeah.
Right. We're maturing, as I say to my team. We're adding some maturity. So
tell us a little bit about how your dad used to estimate jobs, how you used to estimate jobs, and maybe what you're doing today that's a little bit different.
Sure. So it wasn't anything magic back in the days, right? My dad would get a print, and then this is how he taught me how to quote. And I won't dig into too deeply, but he always said it's all about quantity, size, material, and tolerance. So he'd have the print, he'd go through the entire print, he'd highlight the size of the print, and it'd even say, Jim, sometimes I have to really put it into perspective. I'll go out into the shop and I'll just get a box that's about the size, like a cardboard box. It's the size of the print that I'm looking at. Because if you're looking at a part on a print on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and that part's actually 10 times bigger than what you're looking at, you're going to underquote that for sure.
Yep.
So he tried to teach me how to put the part that I was looking at on this flat print into perspective, make it 3D, make it come alive. And it really does. If you have ever done that, it's very helpful. So, I guess in the old days, Paul, it was more or less a good professional guess on what you thought it was going to take to set up the part, buy the tooling, go through, actually cut the piece part and ship it out. Right. And in a low volume machine shop, that was fairly easy to do. Especially if you had the skill, if you were a shop floor person that had experience at machining, you could guess it pretty well, right? We've all been there. We've all been on the shop floor. We know what it takes to locate a dozen tools that you're going to need for the setup, how long it's going to take to put it in the tool holder, how long is it going to take to touch off the tools, make the program. Years ago, we weren't using Mastercam to generate programs. We had to enter it manually in the machine. So that was just the old school way of what I was taught to estimate.
Yeah. And then how did that change, or when did, obviously with implementing Proshop and starting to estimate there, you've sped things up a lot, you're winning more work, but what did you start changing and evolving your estimating before that even, or only really once you made the switch?
No. So of course, with technology, with Excel, we used Excel spreadsheets, much like Pro CNC did in the early years. It was real cumbersome though, and it was not granular at all. As you use that Excel spreadsheet, you could create formulas that were a little bit more granular, and you're always trying to fine tune the estimate a little bit. Yeah. But quite frankly, I think Proshop is a really, really powerful Excel spreadsheet that has all those formula, and it probably is, but
some of it was designed off of the original spreadsheets that
of course
we were using. Yeah.
But no, by implementing Proshop for estimating, which is what I do at my role as president now at CAR, I would say I'm going 300% or 3 times more. I'm faster than we used to, even using the Excel spreadsheets.
That's awesome. And does that mean that you're able to turn things around quicker for clients as well? Get those
sure,
bids in faster?
Well, most prospects and clients want their quotes turned around in 24 to 48 hours. So, I mean, sure. Yeah, I mean, with templated estimated sheets, we can go in and get one out in no time at all.
And what are some of the nuances that you think have helped you win more production work?
Definitely in the cost breakdown, where we can utilize so if you're quoting, we all know that from 1 piece to 2 piece to 3 piece to 10 piece, the price starts really drastically dropping, right?
Sure,
because you're amortizing all the setup charges across the quantity level. However, when you start doing high volume production, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 pieces, we all know that we're not going to have a guy standing there utilizing 100% of his labor time on that one job. We know that employee, that shop floor employee, could easily be running at least 2 machines while that production job is being run. Mm-hmm. So in the cost breakdown module of estimating, we can put in a labor reduction of whatever you think. So again, if it's a really high volume job, all we had to do is put in a 50% reduction in the run time of the job, not the setup time, just the run time, because we know
labor for the run time.
Just the labor for the run time. So when I started utilizing that, it really has helped us win more production jobs. Awesome. Just in 2020 alone, we've done a lot of production, and I'm still fine tuning it. It's still a work in process. So
of course, always is. Companies always are. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that, Jim. Let's dig into a few other things. This was something that we at Pro CNC, we called this our triple threat. But the question is, at the beginning we talked about you want to get the right kind of work in here. Should we even quote a job that's come in as an RFQ, right? At Pro CNC, we had sort of 3 things that if we saw that a part had all 3 of these, high cosmetics, cosmetic finishes, high tolerance, and also really difficult materials, we knew we were going to probably lose money on that. And I was listening to one of your podcasts, Jim, from a few months ago, even. I think it was one about running a successful small shop. And you talked about, don't just buy spindle time by throwing out prices on something because you have, some open time. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you thought about that? Your thoughts about that?
Right. So this is really common during recessionary times too. And maybe some people are so new to this industry, they haven't lived through those recessions. So what I meant by that on the show is, just because things are tight and you want to keep that particular machinist busy, you might have a tendency to take on work that's a little questionable. Mm-hmm. And that it's just gonna bleed. It's gonna hemorrhage dollars. You just cannot take on something that's not a good fit for your shop. And everyone that runs a manufacturing company, a CNC machine shop, knows what their niche is. And I think it becomes dangerous, like I said, especially during recessionary times when we're looking for that next job to keep the machine spindle busy, that you might take on work that is not quite your niche, and you're gonna end up losing money on it.
Yeah. And if something comes along in the meantime that is a good fit, but your machines are busy struggling through this bad fit part, you might not even be able to respond to that better job.
Yeah. And I would say for us, it's not necessarily those 3. It's tight tolerances, skinny parts that, sometimes we get parts, and I'm sure you've seen really skinny parts that are 24 inches long, and there's like a 2000s flatness call out over the entire length. And you're like, there's no way that we can ever get that or achieve that. So
yeah, for every shop, it's going to be different. What is a
Totally.
good niche, obviously. But just, understand sort of your core competencies and make sure those are aligned with what you're quoting. And wanted to also mention, partly because Jim, because you recently got AS9100 100 certified. Now, want to be clear that there's some requirements in the AS standard about risk mitigation and risk assessment, but it is not a part of the estimating process. It is a part of the contract review process.
It is.
But we think it's important to think about that, keep that in mind when you are first quoting a job, because the last thing you want to do is quote a job that you actually can't execute well, receive an order for that job, and then have to go and tell your customer, oh, sorry, we can't do it for this price, or you got to send the job back because we don't have the right machine, or it's not big enough, or whatever. So
that's just painful.
That causes a lot of friction with your client. So
yes. I've only had to do that 1 or 2 times in my career.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, good. So awesome. I really think we want to talk a bit about accuracy here. I talk to a lot of shops every day, and sometimes we get into the topic of estimating and pricing and stuff. And I said, well, how does your shop, price something? And they say, well, the owner will look at the drawing and he'll look at it sideways and say, I think that's about a $500 part. Send $500 to the client, right? So they send $500 or $5,000 or 50,000, whatever it is, and they send it off, and then they win the job, and they have no idea what the plan is, right? None at all. They're like,
None.
Just throw it out into the shop. Good luck, guys. It's due in 4 weeks. Get it done. And so at that point, they're scrambling to figure out, all right, what machines, what people, what do we need, what cutting tools, special cutters, do we have the right taps and thread gauges? And they're just scrambling, and you can run a profitable business that way. I know you can, especially if the owner really really knows their niche, really knows that what they can get away with pricing on those clients. But it causes a lot of friction. It causes a lot of bumpiness, in the road. So
it's hard for employee retention when you run a business like that, and your employees are constantly being barraged with all this stuff coming in. They're like, what am I supposed to do with this, right? It's really hard to keep those folks on the shop floor when they have no idea what's going on from week to week or day to day.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you've been a career machinist, Brian. You've been in shops like that before.
I've been in shops like that.
You're 5 hours over the target time already, and the job's only half done, right?
Right. Yeah.
Scary.
Yes. So being as accurate as you can be within the realm of what kind of time frame you have to turn that quote around in. Of course, you can't, for some, for a 10-piece job or a 5-piece job, it may not make sense to program that job in Mastercam or your CAM system to try to dial in that cycle time to quote to that customer, right? It may be perfectly fine to say, I think that's about a half-hour cut time, plus all the other things. But if you're quoting a 1,000-piece job and you really need to get it down to sub-minute accuracy, it very well might make sense to throw some toolpaths on it to get some idea of what that's going to be, because the higher a quantity you're quoting, the bigger a factor that the cycle time has versus the setup time and other things like that, right? Because if you're amortizing a 5-hour setup over 1,000 parts, that's just a very small bit of time. The other really important part about accuracy in terms of hours is that it sets the shop up for success with smoothly flowing into scheduling and for people knowing what the plan is and how they're going to execute that, right? So if you have broken it down by operation and you say, right, this is going to be 30 minutes of runtime and 4 hours of setup on the mill, and then it's going to go over to the lathe, and then it's going to go into assembly and get 5 minutes of helicoils installed, right? If you can estimate to that level, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that quickly, so you can still turn around your quotes fast, then you're just kind of setting up the shop for success. And that's I think a really important thing to take away. Any other thoughts, Brian or Jim, about the importance of accuracy?
Yeah, one of the things about this, knowing what your capabilities are and being able to really build that into what you're quoting. So that kind of goes back to that triple threat thing, right? Just don't be quoting something that you can't do. It doesn't make sense. But also, if you use the analogy of trying to use a map to get somewhere, if you're hiking or if you're even just driving somewhere, if you have a map, you can plan the fastest way to get there. If you don't, you're going to be guessing at every turn and hoping that the street signs are right and that you're generally going in the right direction, but it's probably not going to be the fastest and most efficient way to do it. So if you just take your manufacturing process and you map it out, then you'll be able to see, oh, why don't I put those helicoils in at the machine while the operator's waiting for that cycle to finish, rather than making a totally separate operation that's going to increase lead time, et cetera. And you might not see that unless you actually do that process and map out the whole manufacturing steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, even that's a really great point about even trying to maximize your or minimize labor as it relates to quoting jobs and what can people do when and where. Yeah, we use that quite a bit at Pro CNC. The idea of this sort of flow process of getting as much work done during the machine cycle as possible, so you didn't have to then do batch labor later to get that stuff done.
Right.
Any thoughts about that one too, Jim?
Yeah, so it could be as simple as just, if the part's coming off the machine and it's ready to ship, why can't you just bag and tag it right there in the machine and put it right in the cardboard box?
Absolutely.
You've got all of your shipping is going to be included in the labor time of running the machine. So it's just one more small granular thing that you can do to cut your labor with.
Yeah, so we called that process bar to box at Pro CNC.
Oh, I'll write that down.
Yeah, bar to box. It's a nice, easy to remember phrase. Because we quite literally would, if we were doing a job that was made out of bar stock, we would literally, we had these very small bandsaws. They were like 3 feet long or something. And we would set it up right next to the machine because they were all on wheels. And we would cut the bar one by one. So we'd
6 inches or so.
Yeah, whatever, 6 inches, a foot, 3 inches, whatever the part size was. We'd cut the material. The machinist would cut the material. Then they'd put it right into the machine. They'd machine it, maybe flipping it to 2 different vice jaws or a fixture, and try to make the part complete in the machine, or possibly flow it directly to another machine on the other side of their space. But basically finish the part, complete as much as they can. Do in-process inspection while the machine's running. The parts that just came off, you're in-process inspecting them, recording that down. And then, doing cleaning, washing, rinsing, helicoil inserts, or maybe just putting in some mask plugs. Maybe the part's going out for anodize and the threads need to be masked. We would get the rubber plugs ourselves and put them in right there while we were machining the parts. So the plating house isn't charging us for that. They don't have to spend the lead time.
Exactly, and it really reduced lead time on processes, which, by the way, one of the things about reducing the lead time on external processes is that sometimes that's the edge you need to beat out your competition to win the quote, right? Because you can do it faster. So if you can think about all those things, they really do make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to talk a little bit about balancing out the equipment in your company and quoting the right price and rates for different types of work. So this is really important to keep all your equipment, all your work centers, all your people kind of evenly busy and not too overloaded in one particular type of machine or department and not as busy in others. So this partly comes down to knowing your customers really well, like what are they willing to pay? Because some customers will pay more for the same exact part than a different customer will. And so knowing your market, knowing your customers, knowing your competitors, sort of what they're charging best you can. And then the idea of don't use the same hourly rate, don't use the same hourly rate for quoting all of your jobs, right? Now this becomes even more important the more sort of widely diversified your services become, right? If you have, if you're a shop with, half a dozen, Haas verticals and a couple of lathes, 2 3-axis lathes, maybe they're not all that different in what you can charge for them. But if you're talking about a more broadly diversified company where you have your $500,000 5-axis horizontal cell system, and you have your bench work, or you still have some 2-axis lathes on the shop floor, right? Those should command a very different hourly rate based on what the market will bear, based on what the equipment is actually costing you to operate and maintain. So don't just like choose $100 an hour and quote all of your work that way. Definitely, charge more for your more expensive equipment that there's probably less of in the market, and they're faster and more efficient, so you can make the parts faster. So it's okay to quote a shorter cycle time, but at a higher hourly rate. So does that make sense, Jim? Do you have any thoughts about this?
It does.
You doing this?
We may not be quite that sophisticated yet to be doing that. Again, we're a smaller shop. We don't have a lot of helicoil inspection time, or installation time, or subassembly work to be done. Pretty much everything, all our machine tools, of course, our 5-axis demands a little bit more per hour. I'm probably not doing it.
Horizontal too.
And our horizontal, I don't necessarily know that I'm doing it the correct way, but I definitely am getting a little bit more dollars per hour for those higher end machines.
So are you actually quoting higher hourly rates for some machines in Proshop?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, so that's, again, the more broadly diversified you are, the more this makes sense, and the more this is something you really should start thinking about. So
I will tell you, one thing that's really helped me is when we're prospecting for new customers, and maybe this is part of a future slide, but what's really helped us in prospecting for new clients is I show them the Proshop estimating screen in the granularity of it, the NRE setup, the regular setup times, the minutes, how long is it going to take to break down, what's the actual runtime. And when they see that in black and white, they know that I'm not just guessing. I'm truly trying to dig in and fine tune the quote for their parts. So
yeah, and I'm sure they appreciate that. And
it's just being transparent.
And it also, I think, gives them a level of trust that if they give you that work, you're already pretty well dialed in with how you're going to do it. You're not going to, come back to say, I'm sorry, I underbid this because I don't, I can't do it for this. The more I look at it, the more I realize I can't do it.
For sure.
We have a question related to this. Damien's asking, what do you include overhead wise for hourly rates of machines? So
yeah, good question. I mean, the way we think about it is there's actually 4 different buckets of cost that a shop incurs. There, of course, is the direct hourly cost of your employee, right? What you pay them plus benefits, and so that's one cost. There is the cost of the machine itself. We call that direct overhead cost. So the machine, the floor space that it's sitting on, maybe the cost of electricity and coolant for that machine. Rent, yep, the actual floor space itself. How big, how much does it take up? Maybe you do, water jet or heat treating, and the electrical bill for the ovens is just crazy high per hour. So you really should kind of factor in, what you're actually incurring as cost, for that direct overhead. And then of course we have all of our out-of-pocket costs, right? What you're going to spend on material and outside processes and inserts and things like that, with a markup typically on top of those. And then the last category is your indirect overhead, right? What does it just take to keep your business open, right? Your insurance bills, your the 401k, I guess that's going to be part of your benefits, but just the other things that it takes that you haven't accommodated for in that direct overhead cost. The expenses of your salespeople, your purchasing staff, all of those kinds of things. In Proshop, you can itemize those all out and try to make that as dialed in as possible, so you're covering all your bases.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense to it's going back to knowing your capabilities and evaluating those, on a routine basis to know, yeah, does this machine really truly cost $225 an hour, or is it more, or is it less? Am I leaving money on the table? Any of that kind of stuff really comes into play, I think, as you're moving through and setting up those rates, and hopefully if you set them up, you want to be able to and this goes, I think leads into another thing you're going to talk about, is have those things preset so you don't have to go and adjust those or fill those numbers in every time. There's part of your default, part of your standards, if you will.
Yeah, of course. Yep, exactly. All right, let's keep moving here. So let's just get into some of the details. And we will show, I think we have a slide with a screenshot that we can talk a little bit more about some of the things that have come up here. But obviously you want to be responsive, right? As we all know, a lot of times the first person to get their quote in will win that job, right? Sometimes customers are all about just turnaround time.
Right.
As long as it seems like a reasonable price and you can hit the lead time, they're going to send it to you. So
I think there's a statistic on that too.
Yes, I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure it's very high. So you got to design whatever system you're using for estimating. It's got to be designed for both speed and accuracy. And we've itemized here just some of the things that we think about that all sort of our variables are going to feed into an estimate. Obviously, how much, as you talked about earlier, Jim, how much time is it going to take to set up the machine? How much time is it going to take to, prep all your tools and even break down the machine later if you want to include that, that are offline, and then once you're on the machine, of course, how long is it going to take for cycle time and change out and inspection and all those kinds of things. With out-of-pocket costs, are you going to incur lot charges, or is it going to be a high enough volume that you're talking about unit prices, for your plating? And then based on the lead time your customers have asked for, are you going to need to pay an expedite fee to the plater to get that turned around? If they have a normal, 10-day lead time and you need to get it turned around in 3 or 4 days, you're going to pay that expedite fee to them, right?
Yeah, forget it nowadays. The finishing companies are really going long on finishing.
Yeah.
What used to be 3 days is now at least a week. So.
Right. So do you have to often incentivize them with, with expediting fees, and do you include those in your estimates?
Sometimes I do. It's keeping it in real time. It's knowing how because a lot of times I may not be privy to what the invoices are actually coming in. So they'll be creating purchase orders for expedited finishing, and I don't even know. But if I am privy to this information, that's when I can enter it in to my into Proshop in the estimating module.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. If this is a quick prototype job and you're just going to make some soft jaws, right? You should throw some money in for that. If you need a really dedicated fixture in order to get that higher density of work holding that you might need to really optimize your cycle times, that's definitely a cost that makes sense to consider. And we'll talk a little bit more about non-reoccurring expenses, but Jim, when you and I are talking a little bit, Proshop has the ability to either, first of all, you can itemize all your non-recurring expenses, and then you can either quote those as a separate NRE charge to your client, or you can just bury it into the unit price. They don't know that you're charging extra for that. And depending on the client, sometimes they really want to see that NRE so they know they're getting the best unit price in the future. And sometimes they just really don't care or want to see that. And they might even think that you're going to soak up that cost yourself and just eat it. But in reality, it's buried into the unit price, and you're going to keep getting that over and over again if they keep ordering at the same price.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, of course, if you're getting into assembly work, it's really important to make sure you're rolling up all those costs, for machining subcomponents, buying hardware, having the proper margins and markup at each level, and rolling that up into the top level. So, and Brian, I know you had an interesting thought about the way to think about a quote. I'd love to hear you share that.
Yeah. So, very often when we're doing quoting and we're thinking about providing these things for our customers, we're just thinking about it and saying maybe it's just pricing. We kind of talked a little bit about that before, or maybe this is going to be just the simple cost structure that we use and so on and so forth. But if we step back a moment and think about a quote as another product that my company provides to my customer, then we've changed how we're thinking about what that activity can be. And so now think about it in terms of a process, because that's what you do on the shop floor. You know, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my tools, and then I'm going to put my fixtures in, and then I'm going to get my program in the machine, and so on and so forth. But on the quoting side, we don't necessarily think about how we build a quote as a process. But like we know everywhere else in the company, if we break it down to a process, we know we can be more efficient. And so again, if you think about a quote as another product that you provide for your customers, then you can compartmentalize that, think about the process, really streamline that, and really try to make that fast and easy and accurate. And then the other side of this that I think is worth mentioning is that internally, if you go from role, department to department to department, so estimating and then contract and order entry, down to project management, purchasing, and so on, you actually have internal customers and suppliers. And so an estimator is literally supplying order entry and contract review and project management with what they're going to work on. So there again, you can think about the quote and the estimate as a product, both something that you're trying to get to your customer so they know what to pay and when they're going to get it, but also later down the road, when project management goes to put this stuff together, they have a clear idea. They've gotten a good packet of information or the process predefined, so they can quickly move into what they're doing. So a couple of different ways that I like to think about this quoting process, again, as a process and as a product that somebody's making.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you for that. So I want to talk a little bit about the idea of using templates to make this faster. So this is an example of just the routing table on a Proshop estimate. You can see here we have broken it down by operation, and we have a number of different columns for different types of costs or time. So we have setup time, which is a repeat type of time. Every time we go to set up this job in the future, it should take about 45 minutes to set up, the Op 50. But the first time we do it, it's going to take an additional 90 minutes because we have to make soft jaws or prove out the code or whatever that additional non-reoccurring expense might be. We also have this field that we call adder time, which is time that you're going to actually incur, but you cannot charge the customer for it. And the most likely use of this field is if you're quoting a really big, juicy production job, but your customer's not willing to pay all the time to get it off the ground. So like in this example.
I've never used that column before, Paul.
Okay.
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's okay.
Interesting.
It's okay. So, I mean, we had this all the time at our shop. Maybe you're quoting on a job that's going to be, 10,000 parts for the next 5 years.
Right.
And you really want to win that. And it's going to come down to, down to pennies on price. But it's going to take you like 20, 30, 40 hours to fixture it, program it, get it off the ground. And your customer is just not willing to pay you, a 5 or 10 grand NRE charge. And if you bury all that into the unit price, that might also not fly.
Be competitive.
So, so you can charge as much as you think they will pay. And if you want to absorb that cost yourself for the additional time, but you want to make sure that this flows smoothly into the shop with the right target times, that's where this sort of adder time comes in.
Got it.
Right? Like it's disheartening as a machinist to get a job and you see that it has 3 hours of setup and it's going to take you 10 hours. You're like, they're just throwing their hands in the air. They're like, what is with this? I can't do this. This isn't fair to me.
So that adder time is telling the shop floor machinist that you can utilize that time. We're just not going to charge the customer for it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, got it.
So they can be cognizant of the fact that, that it needs to happen. You're kind of tuned into the reality of what the actual setup time will be. But in this case, you just didn't feel like the customer would be willing to pay for it, but you still wanted to take the job anyway.
Got it.
It will also utilize that in the cost breakdown and factor that into the profit section of the cost breakdown. So when you put that additional time in, what does it do to your profit margin?
Yep, exactly. Yep, it'll reduce your margin a bit, but you'll still see overall what you're going to do. Yeah. And then of course you can have your templates should likely include, some first part buy off time, some some inspection time, but probably not your actual cycle times, right? That's highly dependent on geometry and individual parts. And then last over here, of course, you can put in non-reoccurring material and hardware. So if you need to buy a fixture plate or some kind of special thing that is only for this job, you can just throw the dollars in for those things too.
Yep.
And then over here on the far right, this is where we see the individual resource rate that's being fed from, in this case, a table of individual machines and what their overhead costs are. And Jim, you did say you are utilizing that or not quite?
No, I'm not using the resource rate at all. I'm actually pulling up an estimate right now to see these columns, see if they mirror to what I'm doing.
This is not what I was planning, but let me click. Let's see, bring up this dashboard. Okay.
Are you pivoting?
Let me just drag this in here for a second. You guys seeing that screen now?
Yeah.
So Jim, this is under the finance dashboard, and it allows you to, it'll be pulling from your work center module, your work cell table. And you can, grab what all the different work centers, and then you can actually have two different rates. You can have the rate that you're going to use for job costing, actual costing once the job is finished, and then you can have a separate rate for estimating, right? So, and if you put it in here, that's what will feed into this resource rate here on the estimate. So, like in this example, here's that big star egg machine I showed earlier. Big, beautiful machine. We know that we can charge more for it, more than it even costs us on an hourly rate. So maybe it costs us $150 an hour, but we think the market will bear $225 an hour for this machine because maybe it's so big or so capable that there's just not that many machines that can make parts, like that. So, or it could be the same, like in this case, this little Haas here, $100, same. But some of these are quite variable, right? So we're only charging $20 an hour for manual assembly, or different things like that. So anyway, hopefully that's useful to you, Jim.
Right.
We have a question about the adder column that I think I'll just mention really quick. So the question is, can you have the adder column not affect the margins? And so, for example, somebody they need to make a fixture, but they're not going to use it just for that one project. They'll use it for other projects. So the short answer is the adder column is not really going to work that way. However, we do have another function where you can specify a fixturing operation with just a little syntax, F35 or whatever it is. So you can create an entire operation that's dedicated to fixture creation time. And then because that's a separate type of operation, the Proshop, you can set it up to where you can charge $0, you can charge half rate or double rate or whatever. So it's totally possible. It's just a little bit of a different approach to how we would think about creating a fixture that's a multi-use fixture.
Why don't you answer that other question by typing it?
Yeah,
it sounds like an actual Proshop customer. Yeah. The other nice thing about using templates is you can have all the relevant information pre-filled for things like vendor lead times and lot charges and mill specs. So if your favorite anodized vendor has a $150 lot charge and they're normally 7 days or 10 days turnaround time, and you can already put in all that mill 6521, all the different mill specs. Excuse me, I think, why does my monitor keep going to sleep? You can fill all that stuff in. So then that flows really smoothly into, project planning and programming and purchasing ultimately as well. So that really helps just kind of keep that stuff flowing smoothly and quickly.
Sure.
When you do win that job, we believe it's really important to verify when you're doing that order entry contract review process. Go into a little deeper, as your programmers start to, dig into that project, program it. How exactly are we going to fixture this? How are we going to set this up? If you catch any big mistakes, it's really important, I'd say early on, to tie in with the estimating department, figure out what you want to do about that. Do you have to go back to the client? Is it that big of an issue? Or can you just eat it up this time because you think they're going to reorder these parts and you'll make it up later? And then this is where that AS9100 clause is. If you're AS certified, you really need to be, you're mandated to be doing risk mitigation, right? Is it possible that that there are things that we cannot actually do? You know, we just didn't look that close at the drawing early. We quoted something, we realized this is a huge problem. Maybe there's a flatness of 2 thou over a 36-inch length, and you're like, you know what, we
the
gotta
parts
take
have an eighth of an inch thick. You know?
Yeah, we got to take exception. We got to take exception to this.
Sure.
This slide here, we're talking about what we call process development, but this is really the important concept of heading off problems at the pass before they actually become a problem. So what we do is, when you're estimating, the estimator can jot down some notes, like there's workmanship standards here, or this is going to require a custom ground tool, that might not be obvious on the drawing when a programmer starts to look at it, or someone in purchasing starts to look at it. But if the estimator or the customer has just told you, hey, this piece of information, you can document that right on the estimate itself, or in some kind of notes area, to make sure that when you win that job, people are going to see and review those notes, so they don't accidentally forget something that the estimator had as tribal knowledge, or the salesperson had as tribal knowledge, early up in the process. Now in Proshop, you can also, come up with solutions and resolve them and assign them to people to make sure that those don't get, don't fall through the cracks. But the concept is really important, to just try to, get that additional information and document it so everyone knows. Now let's assume you've won the job, you did it, and you've shipped the job, and now you need to kind of close the loop, right? So we believe it's really important to always do job costing. How did you actually do on the job compared to what you had estimated? Do you need to re-estimate it next time? Or if you get this job again, is the price still going to be fine? So you can, now in Proshop, you can use that same process development feature to document any potential changes you might want to make for next time. And when the job gets reordered, it'll automatically pop up and warn people about these outstanding items to take a look at. But we did another webinar about achieving reliable profitability. And we actually call this process, part of the process is we call kill the losers, right? If you have a job that you lost money on, if you got the job again at the same price, you would lose money again. You don't want to be doing that. So you really need to dial in that job costing, know what's going on, and make sure that whatever happens next time, you either reprice it, tell the customer, I'm sorry, we can't do this again for you, or figure out a process that you can make money on it. Maybe it's fixturing or new tool paths or a different way to hold the material or something like that. But there's almost always something that you can do to ensure that you don't take another job and keep losing money on a job over and over again. That is it for today. We definitely have just a few minutes for some more Q&A. Someone had asked if we're going to do an actual live demo. So we could switch over to pull up a screen here. Let me go ahead and do that. Because there were some questions. So here is an estimate in Proshop. We can see at the top of the screen here, this is what we call kind of the metadata about this part number, right? Part number, name, description, rev level, who the client is, the contact both for purchasing and technical questions, any notes or other details, and a few other, things that maybe are a bit more deeper. Here we can see what kind of material, we're going to need with the actual, specs. So like on this one here, this is anodizing, and where's my thing coming up? Oh yeah, can we see a demo? Sure, yes. So we can, we can fill in those mill specs. Right in here, you can, put in the 10-day lead time, you can put in the $150 lot charge or whatever, and Proshop will automatically pull these out. So if we see down here, this is what we're actually going to be paying out of pocket for, in this case, this anodize and chem film process. And at 10 pieces, the total lot charges is $270. But once you start getting into 25 and higher, then the unit price starts taking over, and Proshop will multiply the individual quoted price from the vendor and multiply that through into the price. The same thing is true with BOM items. If this had a bill of materials, it would calculate out, your BOM costs across all the different quantities.
Another thing that's really go down a little bit, Paul, I want to share this with all the people that are listening. So see the scrap rate there?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's really, really important, especially if you're working on, high value, high precision parts and low volume quantities. We all know that you just can't make one piece and cross your fingers and hope that first piece is going to come out all right.
Right.
So what Proshop is actually doing, and look in the column, the quantity that you're quoting for is 10, but actually Proshop is quoting out what the cost is to make 11.
Yeah,
it's going to price it out at 10 pieces. And I actually do use what you're doing too. So on some of them, I say maybe 1.5 pieces is going to get the job done. You're really not going to cut a piece in half, but we're going to put in 1.5 cost, or else in the higher volume, 2% is typically what I use on my production work for scrap. So that's a really important part of the equation there.
Right. So I see a question here. What's the average material markup shops are using? I think that it really comes down to you and your market. As you can see in this example, we're using 40% on the smaller quantities and 10% higher. I don't know, Jim, are you willing to share kind of roughly what you use?
I'm 20 to 25%. And as the production goes up, if it's a production job, I might tier it down. So if I'm quoting 10, 50, 100, 200, 500, my markup on the higher, I might just start at 25, then go 23, 22, 21. I don't typically go less than 15% unless it's really, and it depends on the cost. If it's, if it's titanium is $30 a pound. That's a huge markup, right?
Yeah.
So, or, if it's carbon steel, it's not very expensive. So.
Sure.
And I've chatted with a number of folks in recent memory that they're pretty cautious about the markup because of the volatility of the raw materials market right now. So what they're finding is that they're needing to just really be on top of that, and also to be competitive, but also make sure that they can cover any dramatic sudden changes in the cost of materials.
That brings up another good point. This terms and conditions section right down here. You can turn these on and off with a check mark, change them, edit them as you want, but these are sort of the default, and you can set all your own defaults. But this one, we always use this one at Pro CNC, right? Prices are good for 30 days. However, they are subject to changes based on market conditions of material, processes, et cetera. So that gives you an out. If you quoted $30 a pound for titanium and all of a sudden 2 weeks later it's spiked and it's now $40 a pound, and you have something to go back to your customer and say, hey, this, the market is just really volatile right now. I'm going to spend a lot more. I need to pass that cost along to you.
I will go back to the markup field. So you're marking up 40%, but you're marking up the material, the tooling, the shipping charges, and the outside processing as well at that same markup rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And that's different than labor. That's a whole separate page, different, what you're going to add to margins and stuff on labor. So, great point. So we're running pretty tight. I know there's a few more questions we may not be able to get totally to. But on the back end of this spreadsheet, if we go to this cost breakdown page, this is where Proshop will tell you your all your total hours that you're planning on, runtime and setup. This feeds into something you mentioned earlier, Jim, about calculating that labor percentage.
That's the ticket right there.
So now this is a summary of this other page. So you can see here, we're saying that it's going to take 50 minutes or 50% of the time of 15 minutes cycle time. for the operator to keep this machine running, only 25% of this 70-minute cycle time, right? So you can start dialing those in individually here, and that will roll up to be what the calculated value is over here on the backside.
Oh, that's an autofill then based on what you're putting on the front page? Oh,
yes,
okay.
Okay. Yep. Because you have a short cycle time, 2-3 minutes. It's going to take a full person's time to do that possibly.
Sure.
So you have that long cycle time, and then you can just on that one line item say that it's lower.
Got it.
And then of course, Proshop will be charging the entire machine time and the machine burden rate, for the full cycle time. So if you're discounting your labor a little bit for running, but you want to charge the full $200 an hour, $50 an hour, $100, whatever for the machine, that will still be happening in the background. So, well, we are out of time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time today. So thank you again very much for your time today. Thank you, Jim, so much for taking time out of your valuable day to spend with us. Hopefully this was useful and you learned something as well.
I did.
And if you want to reach out to Jim, that's his contact info. That's
or
our
LinkedIn. They can go to LinkedIn too. They can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. We have a relatively new loveyouerp.com website. I definitely encourage you to check that out. It's just super fun. Someone told us recently that trying to market to machine shop owners with hot pink is a boss move. And I thought that was quite a compliment. So yeah, Emily just put in the chat Jim's LinkedIn profile link there.
Perfect. So, thanks, Emily.
Yes, and thank you all again so much. Hopefully that was useful. Feel free to reach out to us if we can help you in any other way. And hope you learned something and take care.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.